In Genshin Impact's version 3.7, we got to meet our first playable character from Fontaine. Well, I mean the first character that has the potential to be playable eventually. However, Charlotte is not the first playable character we've heard mentioned. Of course, Focalors was discussed by Nahida in the last act of the Sumeru Archon quest, but even before that dropped, we had already encountered a possibly playable character already. If you recall Nahida's drip marketing 2 days before the release of the last act of the Sumeru Archon quest, you might have seen a quote by Chief Justice Neuvillette describing her. This person said, "One might say she pays too much attention or dotes on people too much. But while her actions can be flawed, I believe her sense of responsibility as Sumeru's deity to be a commendable thing. That the youngest of gods should be thus, while a certain other person, by contrast, should be so prone to hysterics." This quote alone intrigued me considering that I adore seeing characters from the legal field, and with them being the Chief Justice, they could shed light on Fontaine's views and misgivings about its national value of justice. As a bonus, Nahida mentions that they're a major figure in Fontaine's society, presiding over trials as the Hydro Archon spectates them. With that information alone, I am already committed to pulling them, as long as they don't turn out to be evil or something. And not only am I committed to pulling them, I've also become quite interested in speculating about their potential characterization, because I honestly believe that they have the potential to be one of the most interesting characters to come out of Fontaine's main storyline. So while lore theorists are already rushing to speculate on Fontaine's society, culture issues, and possible storylines, I'm just here to get you pumped for their incredible Chief Justice, Neuvillette. Now, while the name Neuvillette seems feminine, it could also be a surname, so their gender isn't officially known so far. That's why I'm going to be using they/them pronouns throughout this video. So with that, let's get into it. As the Chief Justice of Fontaine, their job is going to be very central to their characterization and will be the source of determining lots of the struggles they face and a considerable portion of their personality, which is a pattern that lots of Genshin characters follow. And the good thing is, the position of Chief Justice does exist in real life, so we know what they do and it's not something difficult to define, like let's say the General Mahamatra, consultant of the Wangsheng funeral parlor, stuff like that. So basically, the Chief Justice knows the law like the back of their hand and can make rulings based on this as part of the Supreme Court. What's very powerful about Chief Justices in real life is that aside from simply understanding the law, they get to make groundbreaking decisions regarding contentious cases, and their interpretations of the law alongside their fellow justices will set a precedent for how regular judges should make their rulings. A major example of this would be Roe v. Wade, in which the US Supreme Court recognized people's right to having an abortion, and it was also the Supreme Court that overturned the ruling last year. So with this, we can expect Neuvillette to have a similar job. They won't just be making rulings on individual cases, but also using their analytical prowess to make decisions that will set the tone for Fontaine's culture of justice. Very powerful indeed. However, it's worth noting that as the Chief Justice, that implies that there are other justices in the Supreme Court. I hope some will be playable, but that's unlikely because Hoyoverse hardly likes repeating jobs, but I digress. This means that while Neuvillette will have their own view of what's right and wrong, they have to regularly face many people who won't agree with their views. And if they seriously want a certain ruling to be passed, they might even have to persuade the other justices to come to their side. Also, we don't know yet how Fontaine's government is structured, so we don't know if the Chief Justice is their equivalent to a head of state. But I think it shouldn't be that way, because in real life we usually have the executive, legislative, and judiciary branches, and the Chief Justice would only be in charge of the judicial branch. However, Genshin does put some spins on real-life political structures, so we can't say yet as of now, and that's something we have to look out for. We can't assume yet that Neuvillette basically runs the country until we get more info. I argued previously that Neuvillette's job is the key to their characterization, so I'm gonna make guesses about their personality based on their job and also their quote about Nahida, because while it's meant to describe her, it expresses an evaluation of the gods, which is almost like a political opinion. As the Chief Justice of Fontaine, Neuvillette obviously values justice, but we don't know yet what their approach to justice is like. Are they punitive, lenient, traditional, revolutionary, pro-poor, objective, emotional? Well, regardless of their attitude, I think we can expect a certain amount of passion towards justice on their part, and I assume they're gonna have a strong sense of righteousness and social consciousness. They're very aware of how they could impact people's lives, and I think they'd be very interested in improving systemic issues because they have the power to do so. They must also be very highly intelligent and conscientious enough to not only remember Fontaine's laws, but read the necessary pieces of evidence as thoroughly as possible. I'm guessing they'll probably be more on the serious side, but Hoyoverse is also great at giving some serious characters a sense of humor, whether unintentional or not. And Sino exists, so... When it comes to their views towards society, I think we can infer a few things from their quote about Lesser Lord Kusanali and someone who is implied to be Folklores. Although they call Folklores hysterical, it doesn't seem to be petty or biased because they compare her to Nahida, who they describe in a fairly objective way. We can sense that Neuvillette is able to recognize leadership flaws, but they're also not quick to judge as long as they can observe a sense of responsibility in that leader. It's a well-rounded judgment on Nahida, so I think we can expect Neuvillette to have these sort of fair assessments on Fontaine's law and social issues too. We can also see how much they believe that having a strong sense of responsibility is necessary when holding power, and if they're not a hypocrite, they likely impose the same standards on themselves as well. Additionally, although they seem to be dissing Folklores, they phrase it in a sighing manner, and the ellipsis seems to indicate that they have more to say but they're clearly holding back. For me, this seems to hint that they're firm in their views but also try to find diplomatic ways of saying things, although their frustrations likely also slip out very regularly in silly ways. From this, I'm imagining a character that's very strong-willed, a trait that I really adore a lot, someone who cares about society, is fair, but might also be a little bit tired and frustrated at times. Hopefully this will lead to a lot of accidental dissing, which would be very much appreciated on my end. Reminds me of how Mondstadt sighs at Varka like in Jean's character story. With all these inferences I've made, I can now speculate about what the role will be in Fontaine's storyline and lore. It's likely that they'll represent Fontaine's establishment as they keep order in their country. However, it seems like they may have the desire to counter this existing establishment, but might be a bit hesitant to do so if it'll result in chaos or something like that. They could also be very traditionally minded but open-minded enough to reconsider some of their opinions and embrace the change that the traveler might bring along with them as they go through Fontaine. To better explain this, I will cite similar characters for reference. I can draw parallels between Neuvillette, Keqing, Kujosara, Kamisato Ayato, Al-Haytham, and Sino. They're all characters who are in positions of power but have also expressed some level of dissent towards their higher-ups, thus becoming catalysts of change in their respective nations' politics, and have also had to face consequences for these opinions and actions. However, a key difference between them and Neuvillette is that Neuvillette seems to possess a more scathing opinion towards their Archon, which seems to be even more intense than Keqing's belief that Rex Lapis is outdated. Even she respects him to some degree. That's not to say, however, that Neuvillette doesn't respect Folklores. In fact, I think they work closely with her and are very faithful to her despite disapproving of her, which is why they might get tired of it, leading them to sometimes talk behind her back. Actually, since they represent Fontaine's establishment, it is also possible that they're protecting their Archon from dissent, and it might take a while for them to come to the Traveler's side if in case we are meant to oppose the Hydro Archon, just as we did with the Raiden Shogun and Raiden A. I think Neuvillette's arc might bear some similarities with Kujou Sara's, wherein they're both part of a broken institution riddled with lots of systemic problems, but they choose to still uphold those institutions because of their righteousness and their belief in the purpose of those institutions. It's only when they find out that the other people in their institution are working against the well-being of their country that they will confront them. However, Neuvillette's arc may also closely mirror Al-Haytham's, where it will initially seem like they're upholding the tradition of their institution while hiding several layers of insanity under them, which will only be revealed due to certain triggers. Their ferociousness might reveal itself at a very unexpected moment, so do watch out for this if ever. This is not to say that their character arcs will mirror that of these characters perfectly, but these are some good templates to consider, and I think it will provide an interesting story for us which will bring out the best in Neuvillette's personality. Of course, there's a possibility that they'll be corrupt, but with their quote about Nahida, I honestly highly doubt that. Nevertheless, if they do end up being corrupt, I hope Hoyoverse handles it in such a way that acknowledges their moral ambiguity instead of just brushing it aside. Now that I've discussed all the essential stuff about Neuvillette's character, I'd like to head towards fun speculations regarding their gameplay. First off, when it comes to their vision, it might be Hydro if you consider the pattern of key political figures of each nation matching the elements of their archons. However, as I mentioned earlier, there might be a real administrative head of state that's entirely different from the Chief Justice. So while Neuvillette could still be Hydro, I think we could also consider the possibility of them ending up with a vastly different element. A pattern which we should watch out for instead is the way political figures have gameplays that are designed to work extremely well with their Archon's elements. It's not so obvious with Mondstadt and Liyue because their Archons have uniform reactions and are highly flexible. However, in Inazuma we find both Kujou Sara and Yae Miko working extremely well with Raiden A in terms of energy, electro-resonance, things like that. As for Sumeru, we have Sino having an aggravate playstyle, Nilou being designed specifically for Bloom, and Al-Haytham just benefiting from Dendro resonance and reactions in general, making them synergize well with Nahida. This leads me to believe that Neuvillette will work extremely well with Hydro. In my view, this means that they're likely either one of Hydro, Cryo, Pyro, Electro, or Dendro. However, I'm ruling out Dendro since we already have Nilou and Kaveh who are Bloom specialists. This leaves us with all the swirlable elements. If Neuvillette possesses any one of these, they have to be really incentivized to cooperate with Hydro. Of course, all these elements work extremely well with Hydro already, but I think it has to be even more in your face with them. Like all Electro characters can benefit from Aggravate, but Sino specifically incorporates both EM and attack scaling in his kit, really incentivizing Aggravate reactions in his team comps. This should be the same for Neuvillette, so let's say, if they're Cryo, they might help Hydro characters lead the freezing and buff them while they're at it. If they're Pyro, they might assist Hydro characters in vaping often. And if they're Electro, they might have a new Electro-charged mechanic. I don't know, maybe this is too presumptuous, but I think it's safe to assume that they'll have HP scaling to work with Hydro Resonance. As for their weapon, I'm ruling out bows and polearms. This is because my impression of these two weapons is that they're often used extensively during actual war by people who really are physically active and are often on the front lines of combat. Bows also feel like something people of humble origin like adventurers would use if they're not at war, and polearms are very closely linked with ancient societies, I believe. Meanwhile, the sword has been a symbol of justice, like Lady Justice wields this weapon, and the claymore would follow suit as a similar weapon. Both of them seem kinda bougie, honestly. A catalyst could also work as well, since a judge would need to read a lot. When it comes to their utility, it'll depend a lot on their personality and their approach to justice, I believe. If they're like Sino, who's more punitive, they might be a DPS who's hungry for on-field time. However, if they're more calm and objective, they may be a support or a sub DPS. They could be an off-field damage dealer, a damage over time character, a debuffing character, a buffing character, who knows. I'll rule out healer for now though, because I do see the pursuit of justice as more offensive in nature since you're punishing those who go against the law lots of the time. So if they are a buffer, they might have to deal a decent amount of damage as well. Regardless, I'm expecting to see a gavel or some scales in their skills, especially in their ult since those are symbols of the court. I also hope they'll have some kind of line like order in the courtroom, but sometimes Supreme Court justices don't do trials like that. I don't know. Regardless, I'd still pull no matter what. With all that considered, I hope you've become more interested in Chief Justice Neuvillette of Fontaine, and I hope they'll really turn out as interesting or even more interesting than I've painted them out to be. Especially since, hot take, I'm honestly not that hyped for Fontaine in general. How about you guys? Are you looking forward to Fontaine? Why or why not? Comment your answers down below and leave a like to boost this video. If you like this speculative take, please consider subscribing to my channel where I make lots of analysis videos like this one that are very character oriented. That's all for today and I'll see you next time. Definitely before Fontaine comes out.